The Mark 8 Golf R behind me is a pre-production US model. We are months before the production version of this car is going to reach the shores of this fine country. What I'm about to do is give you a very granular look at the parts used in the Mark 8 Golf R compared to the parts that were found in the Mark 7 Golf R. This video is for the nerds. Due to this vehicle being based on the MQB chassis, there was a lot of assumption from myself and many others that the parts used in the Mark 8 Golf R were going to be very similar to the Mark 7 Golf R. When I talked to Tanner Faust at Wookiees in the Woods, he was really impressed by the Mark 8 Golf R. And when he took my friend Charles for a ride down the tail of the Dragon, well, Charles peed a little bit.
Come on, Paul!
The information I'm giving you in this video is part numbers looked up for European Mark 8 Golf Rs and comparing them to the US market Mark 7 cars. The European part numbers should be almost identical to US cars with some minor variation. To be clear, what I mean when I say something is the same, I mean it is the identical part number used in the specific model I'm referencing. When I say it's different, it means that that part number is not the same and I have no idea or no way to know how that part is actually different unless Volkswagen is going to give me access to the engineering documentation. Call me guys. Let's talk about suspension. The front shocks on the Mark 8 Golf R are different than the Mark 7. Mark 8 Golf R springs are different, but the upper strut mounts and bearings are the same as Mark 7's, which means you will likely be able to mount coilovers from Mark 7's into Mark 8's, depending on spring rate. The sway bar in this car is different than the Mark 7 Golf R, but is the larger one which was found in the Mark 7 All-Track. The front sway bar links are the same as pretty much every Mark 7, and the lower control arms in this car are the same as Audi RS3 models. The steering knuckles on this car are different than the Mark 7 and at an additional 1.2 degrees of camber, which will help the car handle better. You're probably wondering if you can fit these on your Mark 7, and the answer is you probably can, but you don't need to find out and take that risk because the Club Sport knuckles found on the Mark 7 Club Sport models also have additional camber and would be guaranteed to fit in your car. The front subframe on this car is now aluminum. Unlike the Mark 7 models, which use a steel subframe, now people used to take the S3 one, which was aluminum, and actually retrofit it into cars like this for a weight savings of around 6 pounds. In the rear suspension, almost every single part is different on the Mark 8 over the Mark 7, with the exception of the upper and lower spring perches, the rear trailing arms, and the rear upper control arms. Those are the same as the Mark 7 Golf R. The rear subframe in the Mark 8 Golf R is the same as the Mark 7, which is very surprising because this car has a new torque vectoring rear differential, which allows it to split power to the left and right wheels and allows drift mode. Now I know you're wondering, will I be able to take that differential and retrofit it into my Mark 7 to give my car drift mode? Well, that is a $5,000 differential, and you likely need around $2,000 or $3,000 worth of modules, plus a prop shaft and all the axles. If you want to spend about 15 grand to maybe try to make it work, do it. Just go buy a Mark 8 Golf R. You may not know this, but the good old United States of America and Canada are the only places you can buy a manual transmission car in the Mark 8 Golf R.
DSG is cool too.
This is Megan. She is the Mark 8 product manager for these cars. She's also an automotive enthusiast who owns a Cabrio and a Mark IV R32.
We were really fortunate in that here at Volkswagen of America, we were able to kind of convince Volkswagen AG over in Germany how critical the manual transmission customer is for this market. I mean, over 40% of the Golf Rs that we sell are manual transmission here, so it's a really, really healthy mix. The Mark 8 Golf R for both USA and Canada will come in both a 6-speed manual and a 7-speed DSG, whereas for Europe and the rest of the world, they're just getting a 7-speed DSG right now.
Just remember, if you're considering buying a Mark 8 Golf R and you do not buy a manual car, you are single-handedly responsible for the extinction of the manual in the Golf R, and you've ruined Megan's life. Since we don't have a lot of details about the Mark 8 Golf R, I'm assuming that this is going to be a copy pasta of the Mark 7 Golf R manual transmission. The clutch is probably going to be the same one that you would find in a Mark 7 Golf R. And the reason why the Mark 8 Golf R has different torque numbers for the manual versus the DSG is likely a sign that the manual clutch is not quite up to the task of the additional power. Good news is, you'll have an aftermarket option immediately available, assuming I'm correct, for upgrading the clutch in your Mark 8. Oh yeah, also our short shifter will likely just go right into the Mark 8 Golf R manuals, but we'll mess with it and fiddle around as soon as we have a car to touch. The Mark 8 Golf R uses a 7-speed DSG transmission. Now, while it's a different part number than the Mark 7.5 Golf R, all the service parts are going to be the same. The one change I am sure of is the DSG clutch. The Mark 8 cars use a different DSG clutch than the 7.5 cars, which is likely because of the additional power and torque put out by this car. Oh, also this chicken nugget. The rest of the world has two options for Mark 8 Golf R brakes: 340mm diameter rotors with single piston calipers and dual piston calipers with 357mm rotors that are lightened. Those brakes are also shared with the Mark 8 GTI Club Sport cars. In the United States and Canada, we are only getting the better brakes, which is normally we get the not good, but this time we got the good. All you Mark 7 owners are probably wondering if those brakes will go onto your car. And the answer is I don't know, but we have them on order and we're gonna find out on our GTI real soon. For the rear brakes on the Mark 8 Golf R, you're looking at the same 310mm diameter rotors as the Mark 7 cars. The calipers, pads, and carrier all use a part number that's specific to the Mark 8. The only exception to this is going to be the brake lines, which are the same as this Mark 7. This also will mean that stainless steel lines will be something you can do right away, which we have coming from shopdap.com. The engine block on the Mark 8 Golf R is not sold individually, and for this reason, we have no way to verify if it is the same. We do know that the crankshaft is the same in the Mark 8 Golf R as the Mark 7 GTI and Golf R. Side note, the Mark 8 Golf R uses different connecting rods than the Mark 8 GTI, but the Mark 8 GTI has the same connecting rods as the Mark 7 Golf R. That leads me to believe that the Mark 8 Golf R has beefier connecting rods and will hold up to even additional power than they previously did. The pistons on the Mark 8 Golf R are different than the Mark 7 Golf R. The Mark 8 GTI uses the same cylinder head as the Mark 8 Golf R, but this is different than the Mark 7 Golf R cylinder head. Just about every part in the cylinder head of the Mark 8 is different than the Mark 7, with the exception of the intake valves. Also, the reason why this engine cover is floppity like this, or at least what I've heard, is that someone somewhere got into a car accident with an MQB car and the engine cover had hurt somebody. I also compared the Mark 8 GTI cylinder head to the Mark 8 Golf R cylinder head, and the only thing that I found that was different was the exhaust cam. The Mark 8 Golf R cam likely has a higher lift and or duration for the larger turbo. Since we're on the topic, let's talk about the turbo. There's very little specifics about anything on the Mark 8 Golf R turbo. It's said to be larger than the IS38 found on the Mark 7 Golf R turbo, but we don't know for sure. I did reach out to the guys at APR who have had some Mark 8 models for a while now, and they didn't have a lot of information they could share, but they did give me this chart that shows a comparison between inlets and outlets on turbos of Mark 7 and Mark 8s. The turbo on the Mark 8 Golf R uses the same gasket where it bolts the cylinder head as Mark 7 models. This means this turbo will for sure bolt up to Mark 7 cars. I would have more specifics on that, as I have had a Mark 8 Golf R turbo on order for some time, and we were supposed to have it last week, but a company whose name rhymes with FedEx has lost our turbo, and we are sadly left lonely and turboless.
Mission failed. We'll get them next time.
The boost system on the Mark 8 Golf R is also new. Most notably, the diverter valve has moved from the turbo to located right here in the front of the engine. This is as close as possible to the throttle body for maximum throttle response. The intercooler on the Mark 8 Golf R is a different part number than Mark 7's, but also a different part number than Mark 8 GTI's, which, as always, I would assume this car is going to have a slightly better intercooler than any Mark 8 GTI. It's likely that the MQB intercoolers are likely to fit in these cars. There's some questionable about clearance and things like that, but they should drop in place and function. As mentioned in the GTI video I did just like this one, the Mark 8 cars got a pretty big bump in the fuel system, but the Mark 8 Golf R has the same fuel pump in the tank as the Mark 7 Golf Rs. The high pressure fuel pump on the Mark 8 Golf R is different than the Mark 8 GTI, and the notes that they say on this engine are that the high pressure fuel pump has been bumped from 200 bar that you would find on the Mark 7 models to 350 bar on the Mark 8 models. This is 1,000 PSI more than a Mark 7 would have if you upgraded the high pressure fuel pump for like a big turbo setup. Side note, Mark 8 Golf Rs use the same high pressure fuel pump as the European Mark 8 GTI Club Sport, which is different than the normal GTIs because they share the same turbo as well, and that makes me believe that the Golf R and the Club Sport cars have a higher pressure fuel pump than the Mark 8 GTI, so people with GTIs may end up needing to upgrade. The injectors on the Mark 8 Golf R are different than the Mark 7 Golf Rs, and they use the same injectors as the GTI models. Also, another thing that I know people are going to be asking, the Mark 8 Golf R does not have multi-port injection in the US or in Europe, which I know is going to make some people sad. The radiator is different in the Mark 8 Golf R than the Mark 7 Golf R, and is different than the Mark 8 GTI as well. The oil cooler is the same one used on the Mark 8 GTI, but is different than previous Mark 7 models. The thermostat housing and water pump assembly on the Mark 8 R is the same as the Mark 7 models. And before you rush to the comments to protest about the same water pump and thermostat assembly, just know that the failure-prone ones were a previous revision of that same part number, so I suspect this is not as big of a concern as you likely have. The Mark 7 Golf R has a different but similar additional radiator. It switched sides, and that concludes everything I have to say about the cooling system. The engine mount on the passenger side of this car is different than Mark 7 models. The transmission mount, which is on the driver's side of the car, is going to be the same on the 7-speed DSG, but we don't know about the 6-speed manual because we don't have another VIN to check, but that's also likely the same. The pendulum mount is the same on the Mark 8 Golf R and the Mark 7.5 Golf R, and so is the bushing that's in the subframe. That means that all of the aftermarket options for pendulum mounts should work from the previous generations. A few rapid fire differences. The timing chains, some are the same and some are different. Intake dividers inside the runners on the head, same. Intake manifold, different. Oil filter and housing, the same. PCV valve, different, also has a sensor in it. Wow, we covered a lot of ground there, so I bet you're wondering, what does it all mean? And in our Mark 8 GTI video, we found that a lot of the parts in the Mark 8 GTI are the best of what's possible for the Mark 7 models. On the Mark 8 Golf R, however, you can see that a lot of the parts are different and shares very little with the Mark 7 platform, which means this Mark 8 Golf R has been redesigned and is better in just about every single way. We will have a lot more Mark 8 content coming, especially once these cars hit the ground in the US. Charles, aka the Hum Mechanic, and I will have a lot of things planned that are coming near launch, and we do have a Facebook group that we've created, which we will link to in the description, that you can check out for Mark 8 specific stuff. Remember, everything in this video we talked about was based on European VIN numbers, and we don't have US VINs here because the cars don't exist yet. If they change anything for the US model, there may be some variation into the things that we talked about today. Lastly, if you're going to buy a Mark 8 Golf R, you better get a manual, or else you'll be letting Megan down, and you'll be ruining the future worse than if Skynet got John Connor. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more like it, and shopdap.com for all your parts. We're here.